Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We must warn you that the views and opinions expressed in this article are exclusively those of the scriptwriters. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any department or persons of the University of Richmond, U.S. government, Waynesboro chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, nor any persons whose litigious expressions of freedom may include suing a couple of college kids doing a school project. Analyses performed for this project are intended both to inform and entertain. Therefore, rhetoric used here should not be repeated willy-nilly in public discourse. Do not drink the Kool-Aid. Drink responsibly. The educational portions of this project are sourced from Dr. John Moeser's Politics of Annexation. Please spare Dr. Moeser of any reproach. He was neither involved nor complicit in the birthing of this monster.
After the Second World War, white families translocated from urban regions to the developing suburbs in a pattern that came to be known as white flight. Financial opportunities provided by federal and veteran loan programs led to huge growth in areas outside cities. Blacks, however, were barred from utilizing these programs to follow whites into the suburbs. Realtors, bankers, and local governments colluded to prevent the development of black neighborhoods through restrictive practices such as redlining. Decaying urban environments, coupled with the desegregation of public schools, prompted whites to flee the city in droves. As a result, Richmond found itself in a pickle. White flight was diluting the voting power of whites in the city, and leaders feared a black takeover of the city council and mayoral offices. Richmond leadership needed to reassert its power before the approaching 1970 city elections. To accomplish this, city officials conspired to annex portions of the developed suburbs to increase the proportion of whites within the city limits.
Before we begin, we need to explain how annexation works, specifically in Virginia. Like with most of the country, Dillon's rule permits state legislatures to control much about local municipal governments. The Virginia state lawmakers, however, were particularly sympathetic to the city, given its historical status as the former capital of the old Confederacy. They made several amendments to the state constitution, permitting Richmond to gloss over economic justifications for annexations and focus solely on demographics to maintain their power. Moving forward, Richmond had two options: reach a settlement with an adjacent county, or go through a special 3-judge annexation court. By now you have probably realized that several players in our story were less than saintly with their actions. Take heart, as we dive down this rabbit hole of judicial and legislative interworking.
The city's concern about a timely outcome. With sweaty palms, the city officials sought out Chesterfield County officials directly and began secret negotiations in a variety of venues, including a Mr. Donut coffee shop. The talk soon fell apart, as it became obvious that the city was only interested in people and not quality pastry products. Following the appointment of Judge Old's replacement, the city turned again to the annexation court. However, hope in a judicial resolution proved short-lived, as one of the 3 judges, Judge White, stepped down following public outcry concerning his dubious handling of court documents. Though their time crunch was becoming exceedingly critical, the city was not so easily defeated. In the town of Williamsburg, land of the former Virginia capital, another ring was forged. The state organized the Altizer Commission, which put even greater pressure on the county to settle. County officials feared that the state's Wild Bill legislature would force a shotgun marriage between the adjoining municipalities. Uncertain about the terms of such a union, Chesterfield capitulated shortly after, hoping to cut their losses. The Virginia General Assembly, however, wasn't finished. To circumvent future problems, the body passed an amendment to the state constitution that allowed them to annex additional area for Richmond every 10 years. While the Chesterfield officials felt that the settlement minimized their losses, many of the county residents were upset with the resolution. Civic associations led the way in the movement to appeal the annexation ruling ahead of the implementation date. Movement leaders eventually turned to prominent black city leader Curtis Holt, hoping to overturn the mandate on grounds of its violation of the 1964 Voting Rights Act. Holt had concerns about funding, however, and the partnership fell apart. Forced to protest the annexation on their own, Chesterfield residents found that the appeals court heavily favored the city. The rebellion fizzled out in late December 1969 as the last appeal request was denied. The county found itself powerless as the annexation went into effect on January 1, 1970. A year later, Curtis Holt returned and hired a lawyer to file a lawsuit disputing the legality of the annexation. Despite initial successes, Holt's lawsuit fell apart as the city fought back with a powerful counterattack. Undeterred, Holt's camp filed a second lawsuit shortly after. The case found its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where deliberation continued for 5 years. The High Court unanimously concluded that the city's motive for annexation was racial. However, instead of ruling on the annexation directly, the Supreme Court decided to return the case to a D.C. court, where it was upheld. The city of Richmond did not emerge unscathed, however. In recompense for such discriminatory motives, the Supreme Court banned the city from making future annexations. Richmond was also ordered to shift from at-large voting to a ward system for city elections. Black voters capitalized on their newfound representation 7 years later when the polls opened in 1977, and for the first time in the city's history, a black mayor was elected to head a black majority on the Richmond City Council.
The hateful intentions of Richmond's oligarchy manifested in the form of an annexation designed to silence the voice of a rising urban demographic. We saw that long-standing racial divisions were able to cloud the eyes of regional judges and legislators alike, leading to the passage of such an amoral measure. Fortunately for those in Richmond, our court system was able to lift the bar that had been placed on their constitutional rights. In the end, basic human dignity was enjoined by the court system, and the elected leaders came to more accurately reflect the political desires of the constituents of Richmond. The Richmond annexation set a precedent nationwide, and the judicial strikeback likely halted similarly designed schemes in other cities. However, the tools of discrimination have evolved over the years. Today, voter suppression tactics are not as blatantly amoral as the annexation of 40,000 white people. Gerrymandering today has not been challenged successfully through a constitutional basis, and voting rights are often limited as a result of increasingly sophisticated legislative mechanisms designed to ensure that voters are powerless to have their voice heard in the political process. We hope you enjoyed our soiree, our foray into the 1970 Richmond annexation. Thank you, and good night.